When you wake up thirsty at 2 a.m., you probably stumble to the kitchen in the dark. You know the layout of your house. You aren't afraid. But if you took a walk in the dark in 14th century London, you wouldn't just be risking a stubbed toe. You could be arrested. In medieval English law, simply walking outside at night without a light source made you legally suspect of a crime. You were classified as a nightwalker. Because before electricity, the dark wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an absolute blinding wall, and the tools our ancestors used to survive it were expensive, dangerous, and sometimes smelled like rotting meat. Today, we suffer from so much light pollution that astronomers use a measurement called the Bortle scale to track it. Level 9 is a glowing modern city. Level 1 is a sky so dark the Milky Way casts a shadow. Before the 1800s, every night on Earth was a level 1. When the sun went down, the world simply disappeared. You couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. This absolute blackness was a massive physical hazard. If you read coroner reports from the Middle Ages, they are packed with mundane tragedies. People routinely walked into ponds, fell into open latrines, or drowned in shallow ditches just feet from their own front doors, simply because they took a wrong turn in the pitch black. So you needed light, but you couldn't just flip a switch. Creating a flame with a tinderbox took minutes of striking flint against steel, hoping a spark would catch on a piece of charred rag. Try doing that with freezing hands in total darkness. And once you had a flame, feeding it was a luxury. When we think of historical lighting, we picture thick, beautiful beeswax candles. But beeswax was incredibly expensive. It was reserved for the church, the wealthy, and the nobility. If you were a regular person, you used tallow. Tallow is rendered animal fat, usually from sheep or cows. A tallow candle didn't smell like vanilla or lavender. It smelled like a hot slaughterhouse. It coated your ceiling in greasy, gray soot. Worse, the wick didn't burn away on its own. Every 10 minutes, you had to manually trim the charred tip with a special pair of scissors called a snuffer. If you forgot, the flame would flare up, spit boiling fat, and potentially burn your house down. Tallow was so deeply tied to survival that in times of severe famine, poor families would actually eat their candles to stave off starvation. But what if you were too poor even for beef fat? You used a rushlight. A rushlight was literally a weed, a meadow rush, peeled to its core, dried and dipped in leftover bacon grease or household fat. You clamped it in an iron holder at an angle. It gave off a pathetic, sputtering glow and burned out in about 15 minutes. Because light was a ticking clock of money, people changed their behavior to save it. There was a specific time of day, right after the sunset but before it was time for bed. It was too dark to sew or read, but lighting an expensive candle felt like a waste. Historically, this twilight hour was known as blindman's holiday. Families would sit together in the fading shadows, doing nothing. They would tell stories, sing, or just listen to the fire crackle. It was a forced period of rest, dictated entirely by the economics of the dark. But as the night deepened, the fear set in. Our ancestors were terrified of the dark, and for good reason. It was the domain of highwaymen, cut-purses, and in their minds, literal demons. But the most terrifying monster of the night wasn't supernatural, it was fire. Pre-industrial cities were made almost entirely of wood, thatch, and pitch. A single knocked-over lantern or an untended hearth could incinerate 10,000 homes before sunrise. This is where the concept of the curfew comes from. The word curfew originates from the Old French phrase couvre-feu, literally cover the fire. When the town bell rang at 8 or 9 p.m., it wasn't just a suggestion to go to sleep. It was a strict legal mandate. You had to damp down your hearth fire with ashes. If you walked the streets of a 17th century city, you would see the night watch pacing the alleys. We often think of them as early police officers, but they were actually fire alarms. Their primary job was to sniff the air for smoke. With the fires covered and the candles snuffed, the pre-industrial world plunged into a silence and a darkness we can barely comprehend today. And this absolute dark did something incredible to the human body. It changed how we slept. If you wake up at 3 a.m. today and can't fall back asleep, you probably panic. You stare at your glowing phone, calculate how many hours you have left, and think your brain is broken. But for thousands of years, waking up in the middle of the night was scheduled. Historians and anthropologists have discovered that before artificial light, humans experienced Biphasic sleep, meaning they slept in two distinct shifts. You would go to bed shortly after dark and experience your first sleep. Then, right around midnight or 1 a.m., you would naturally wake up. You wouldn't panic. You would stay awake for an hour or two. During this waking gap, in the pitch black, people would pray. They would analyze their dreams. They would have quiet conversations with their spouses. Doctors specifically recommended this middle-of-the-night window as the best time to conceive children because the body was rested but not yet exhausted from the next day's labor. After an hour or two of waking darkness, you would drift back off into your second sleep, waking up at dawn. The dark wasn't just an empty void. It was a structured, intimate part of human culture. In the 19th century, everything changed. Gas lamps and later electric bulbs flooded the streets with light. We conquered the night. We pushed back the shadows, eradicated the Nightwalker laws, and made it safe to walk to the kitchen at 2 a.m. We gained an incredible amount of safety and productivity, but we lost something too. We lost the quiet intimacy of blind men's holiday. We lost the peaceful rhythm of the divided sleep. We turned the night into just a darker version of the day. We banished the dark, and in return, we forgot how to rest in it.